Konnichiwa, minasan. Hello and welcome to the 77th Annual Commemoration Service for Atomic Bomb Victims. My name is Daryl Miho, and I am a director with the American Society of Hiroshima Nagasaki A-bomb survivors. While we wish we could see you all in person, we are grateful that we can welcome people from around the world. It has been 77 years since nuclear weapons were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And we gather here today to remember those who lost their lives and to support those who carry the burden of those horrible days in human history. In today's program, we will hear from some of our directors about their experiences in Hiroshima. We also have messages from the mayors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And our keynote speaker today is Glenn Muranaka, editor at the Rafu Shimpo. We want to thank you for joining us on this somber occasion. And now I'd like to introduce our director and historian, Dr. Gloria Mataguno-Saller.
Thank you, Daryl. The American Society of Hiroshima and Nagasaki Atomic Bomb Survivors would like to thank all of you for attending our event today. As much as we had hoped that this could happen in person this year, we are at the same time thrilled that we can do this, using this new mean, and that everybody from around the world can join us. Your support this past 3 years has motivated us all to persevere in advocating on behalf of world peace and on behalf of a world without nuclear weapons. As the war in Ukraine enters its 7th month, and as the threat of using nuclear weapons on civilians is a daily occurrence for the people of Ukraine, we join the voices rising from all corners of the world, and in unison we pledge to keep spreading our message of peace and our message for a world without nuclear weapon. And now here is Mrs. Hiroko Nakano.
高野山米国別院の松本雄樹主幹をご紹介いたします。松本主幹は2020年1月に小東京高野山別院に着任されました。まなしにコロナ禍のパンデミックに見舞われ、1984年来欠かすことなく行ってきたお寺での原爆祈法要を行うことができず、今年で3回目のリモート法要となります。高野山米国別院では、広島の平和公園から分党された平和の灯火を守っていただき、毎朝供養のお祈りをしていただいています。それではビショップ松本、よろしくお願いいたします。万歳。天皇宮中一世上来少総優勝継承賞単体マジ天少女観作霊卓総万米風陽劇中万下楽半万下当時栄奏金庫永寿一世上来窮地金庫三馬か殺到外来主会遅れ司法部公部下永即世中高環境省参金庫主芸
み敬って真言教習大日如来両部会へ諸尊生寿ことには本尊少者マカビルシャナ如来高僧大師弘法大師並びには真空崩壊越祭三宝の境外に申して申作上来秘密大乗の妙典般若理宗教を付授し合わせて功徳人人なる光明真言を念受し立てまつり現当偽の安楽を誓いたまいしご奉号を唱えて広島長崎原爆犠牲者追復菩提のためにエコーす本日ここに仏前を称言し追復の誠を運んで高下灯明供物を備え立てまつる奥義願わくはこの上号に応えて少量速やかに無常の物価を増進せしめたまわんことをないし崩壊平等利益これとき令和4年今が今日高野山真言宗米国別院主観それがし敬って申す
皆さんこんにちは。高野山米国別院の松本雄樹でございます。今年も ASA 主催の広島長崎原爆犠牲者追悼法会は Zoom で行われることになりましたので、今年も昨年と同様 ASA の皆様に一座のご供養を行いビデオに収めさせていただきました。しかし高野山米国別院では予定通り8月1日に法会を行うことになっております。お時間がある方はぜひご参加いただければと思う次第でございます。今年のお務めは例年にも増して心が重く平和を考えさせるご供養となりました。なぜなら今年はまた原子力放射能の犠牲者が出てしまったからであります。ウクライナのチェルノブイリ原子力発電所で穴を掘って軍事作業をしていたロシアの兵士たちが地中の高濃度放射能を浴びてしまい被爆いたしました。多くの兵士が体調を壊したというニュースでありました。またロシアの大統領プーチン氏はロシアの核爆弾保有を脅し文句に使って西側諸国に対して恫喝行為を行いました。広島長崎の原爆からもう70数年が経ち、世界中の人々が核の軍事的利用は悪であると知りながら、我々人類はその悪からなかなか逃れることができないでいるのです。世界の人々が安心して暮らせる土地に住み、お互いにいがみ合うことなく穏やかに生活し、お互いの心を察し合う優しい気持ちを持てるよう、そう願うばかりであります。今日の集いが明日の幸せの糧となりますようにと心を込めてお祈りをいたしました。
ここで ASA にとってとても大切な方をご紹介させていただきたいと思います。この方は長年にわたり事務的なこと、経理、人間関係、メンバーの方々のアドバイザーなど、会に必要なお仕事をお一人で担ってくださり、今の ASA の基盤を作ってくださった方、ASA 会長、更科淳二さんです。更科会長、どうぞ。
Thank you, Taiko-san. Taiko Okabe's mother is the first president for the atomic bomb survivors in the United States. My name is Junji Sarashina. I'm the current president for ASA. I was born in Lahaina, Maui, Hawaii, territory of USA. I'm a Korean War veteran, served in the Army, in the Military Intelligence Service. I am 93 years old and also a hibakusha. For 8 years, I lived in the Hawaiian paradise until my mother and siblings decided to move to Hiroshima. So my oldest brother can learn to take over the family temple in Hiroshima. August 6, 1945. I was a 16 years old high school student attending Hiroshima Ichu High School. Those days, all high school students were forced to work for the government. In my case, I worked at a factory 2 miles from the hypocenter, and I was making ammunition for the government. 8:15 in the morning, I stepped out the factory building. That moment, the sky was covered with orange glow, and I was blasted and knocked out by a strong force. I was covered with debris, roof tile, rocks, lumber, glass, and concrete. I was hurt here and there and had cuts, but nothing serious. 2 hours later, I went to the Kannonbashi, the bridge, and trying to go back to my dormitory. No way, because that bridge was covered with thousands of people moving toward me, and the entire city of Hiroshima was burning. I slept that night on the river bank and watched the city of Hiroshima burn all night long. The following day, I started to go toward my dormitory, which is on the east side of the city of Hiroshima. The city of Hiroshima was gone, was destroyed, burned, and nothing was there except many dead bodies, wounded people, and injured people. I came across Red Cross Hospital on the only 1 mile from the hypocenter. That ground was covered with piles of dead people, burned, injured people. There, I saw 5 kids on the ground, badly burned. I recognized the uniform because even though it was burned, that was the same uniform that I was wearing, my school uniform. The kids were whispering and begging, "Mizu, mizu chodai, give me some water, water." I got some tin can, got some water, gave some to the first kid. The water trickled off his lips, and he didn't even have the strength to swallow the water. The second kid took a sip, opened his eyes, and said, "Arigato," then closed his eyes. We were told by our teacher that do not give water to any burn victims because that will kill them. But I did. Did I kill those 5 kids? 2 years ago, about 64 students, 6th graders from Fuzoku Shogakko interviewed online some of the ASA board members, Midori Seino, Hiroko Nakano, Taiko Okabe, and me, Junji Sarashina. They asked some questions like, how's life in the United States? What did you do after the bomb exploded? And what do you think about the world peace? As a result of this interview, Mayor Matsui from the city of Hiroshima visited the kids' school and their classroom. The kids were so happy to see the mayor, and they were proud to be able to talk to the mayor. Today, some of these kids are attending the Fuzoku Chugakko High School attached to the university. We are pleased that these young students have studied to be better understanding the meaning of world peace. World peace is a fragile thing. We are witnessing that in Ukraine at this moment. Today, we are gathered here to pray for the souls of the atomic bomb victims. 120,000 died in the city of Hiroshima. Also, 70,000 people killed in the city of Nagasaki. Let's hope that nobody will ever use the atomic bomb, nuclear weapon on human being again. Thank you. ありがとうございました。
We are honored to have received once again messages from the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki on the occasion of this commemoration event. Here are the mayors of Hiroshima, Mr. Kazumi Matsui, and Mr. Taohe Tomihisa, mayors of Nagasaki, as they convey their messages of peace on behalf of the citizens of their cities.
第77周年 ASA 原爆期追悼法要が執り行われにあたり、原爆の犠牲となられた方々の御霊に対し、謹んで哀悼の誠を捧げますとともに、メッセージをお送りいたします。米国広島長崎原爆被爆者の協会の皆様並びに関係者の皆様におかれましては、在米の被爆者に対する支援にご尽力いただくとともに、この追悼法要を長年にわたり執り行われておられますことに対しまして心から敬意を表します。77年前、広島は一発の原子爆弾によって一瞬で焦土と化し、罪のない多くの人々にむごたらしい死をもたらしただけでなく、かろうじて生き延びた人々も放射線障害や健康不安、さらには生活苦など、その生涯にわたって心身に深い傷を起こしました。こんな思いは他の誰にもさせてはならないとの願いから、被爆者は自らの体験を語り、核兵器の恐ろしさや非人道性を伝えるとともに、他人を思いやる気持ちを持って平和への願いを発信してきました。昨年1月に発効した核兵器禁止条約は、 こうした被爆者の願いや行動が国際社会を動かし結実したものです。これからはこの条約に基づき核の脅威のない世界の実現を目指していかなくてはなりません。しかしながらロシアによるウクライナ侵攻により軍事力による暴挙は軍事力によって抑え込むしかないとの危険な考えが勢いを増しています。為政者が核抑止に頼り続ける限り人類は核兵器の危険に怯え続けなければなりません。そうならないためにはどんなに道は険しくとも核兵器をなくすことによって根本的な解決を目指す必要があります。核兵器廃絶の道のりは決して平坦ではありません。本州は引き続き被爆の実相を守り、国境を越えて広め、次世代に伝えるための活動を不断に行い、世界166の国地域8100を超える平和首長会議の加盟都市とともに世界中で平和への思いを共有するための文化を振興し、為政者の政策転換を促す環境づくりを進めていきます。本年6月には初めて開催された核兵器禁止条約の締約国会議に出席し、人々の核兵器廃絶と世界恒久平和を願う輪を各国の為政者に広げていくよう求めてまいりました。また2023年には本市において主要国首脳会議 G7 サミットが開催されます。原子爆弾により破壊された広島は戦後75年は草木も生えないと言われた廃墟の中から世界恒久平和を希求し目覚ましい復興を成し遂げた町です。この広島の地で各保有国を含む主要国の首脳が集い対話する意義は極めて大きく、被爆の実相に触れることで核兵器が絶対悪であること、平和こそが成長と繁栄、そして幸福をもたらすということがより一層世界で共有されることを希望しています。被爆者の平均年齢は84歳を超え、高齢化が一段と進み、一人暮らしや寝たきりなど日常生活に支援を必要とする方が一段と増加しています。こうした中、在外被爆者の援護についてはさまざまな国や地域に居住している在外被爆者の現地の実情を踏まえ、国内被爆者と同様の援護が受けられるよう引き続き国に強く働きかけを行ってまいります。皆様には今後とも核兵器の廃絶とその先にある世界恒久平和の実現に向け共に力を尽くし行動してくださることを心から期待しています。終わりに原爆死没者の御霊に心から追悼の意を表しますとともに、ご列席の皆様の今後ますますのご健勝とご多幸を心よりお祈りいたします。
皆さんこんにちは。長崎市長の田上富久です。広島長崎原爆期原爆犠牲者追悼法要の開催にあたりまして、長崎市民を代表してメッセージを送らせていただきます。米国広島長崎原爆被爆者協会の皆さん、毎年遠くロサンゼルスにおきまして原爆で亡くなられた方々の法要を催していただき、本当にありがとうございます。心から感謝を申し上げます。1945年8月9日午前11時2分、長崎の町は一発の原子爆弾によって一瞬にして壊滅しました。熱戦と爆風、そして放射線は子どもたちや女性、高齢の方々など多くの一般市民も差別に襲い、約7万4000人の尊い命が奪われました。それから今年で77年目を迎えます。被爆者の方々の高齢化が進み、被爆者の方自身による 被爆の実相の継承はだんだん難しくなってきています。その中でも原爆の犠牲となられた方々の苦しみを風化させることなく後世に語り継いでいくことは私たちの使命であると思います。長崎市では被爆体験の掘り起こしや被爆体験を語り継ぐ人材の育成に力を注いでいます。そして同時にこれまでにない平和の新しい伝え方、新しい技術なども使った新しい伝え方を探し出して支援する取り組みも行っています。一方で世界に目を向けますと、昨年の1月に核兵器禁止条約が発効し、平和な世界の実現に向けて新たなスタートを切りました。しかし今般のロシアによるウクライナへの侵攻に際して多くの市民の命が奪われています。またあろうことか核兵器の使用さえ示唆されました。被爆者が自分たちと同じような思いを世界中の誰にも二度とさせないという思いからこれまでずっと訴えてきた核兵器の廃絶、そして世界恒久平和への実現への道のりは非常に厳しいものとなっています。そのような状況にあるからこそ改めて被爆地である長崎市から核兵器廃絶の実現に向けて原子雲の下で何が起きたのかという事実を、そして被爆者の方々の体験を世界に、さらに若い世代に継承していくことがますます重要になってきていると感じています。米国広島長崎原爆被爆者協会の皆さん、諦めることなくたゆむことなく平和な世界の実現に向けて一緒に力を合わせて進んでいきましょう。本日お集まりの皆様のご健康とご多幸を記念して私の挨拶とさせていただきます。
Our guest speaker this year is Ms. Gwen Muranaka. Ms. Gwen Muranaka is the senior editor of the Rafu Shimpo, the longest running Japanese American newspaper in the United States. The Rafu Shimpo has followed over the years the case of the atomic bomb survivors residing in the United States. Several articles were featured in the Rafu Shimpo over the decades. And whenever an important event would take place that would benefit the atomic bomb survivors residing in North America, the Rafu Shimpo will always be present. Ms. Gwen Muranaka, over the years as senior editor, has interviewed several atomic bomb survivors, members of the American Association of Hiroshima Nagasaki atomic bomb survivors. We are honored that she accepted our invitation this year to be our guest speaker. Here is Ms. Gwen Muranaka.
It is an honor to speak with you today as we mark the somber anniversary of the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I thank the American Society of Hiroshima Nagasaki atomic bomb survivors, whose mission to live in a world that abolishes nuclear weapons couldn't be more important. I am Gwen Muranaka, senior editor for the Rafu Shimpo, the Los Angeles Japanese daily news. For more than 20 years, I have worked at the Rafu. Some of the most important, vital work we have done is to report and share the stories of the hibakusha, the survivors of the atomic bombings. The role of journalists is to listen and to document, to report with clarity and empathy, to provide information in the belief that with the careful reporting of facts, the documentation of events, by bearing witness, an informed society can make better decisions. That has been the mission of the Rafu Shimpo since its founding in 1903. The newspaper has weathered wars, incarceration, and pandemics. Next year, the newspaper, with staff working in Little Tokyo, and remotely from our homes, will mark its 120th year. On August 31st, 1946, the New Yorker magazine devoted its entire edition to journalist John Hershey's searing account of the bombing of Hiroshima as seen through the eyes of 6 survivors. The New Yorker explained its belief that few of us have yet comprehended the all but incredible destructive power of this weapon, and that everyone might well take time to consider the terrible implications of its use. At the RAFU, we have covered the atomic bombings and their impacts in some ways as a local story, because it is. The Hiroshima peace flame continues to burn at Koyasan Buddhist Temple on First Street in Little Tokyo. Many have roots in Hiroshima, including myself. My grandmother spent her youth in Itsukaichi, Hiroshima. Many hibakusha reside in Southern California. And so in the pages of the RAFU, you will read the words of Junji Sarashina, Kaz Sueishi, Howard Kakita, and Wataru Namba. They are not just names, they are leaders and members of the community. They are survivors, hibakusha, who have shared their stories and in turn inspired others. And not just words, but with actions, exhibitions, and important initiatives organized by the hibakusha themselves. Reporting on these activities is part of the work of the Rafu Shimpo. It was in 1965 that 3 survivors, Satoru Ernest Arai, Tomoe Okai, and Kaname Shimoda, got together and formed a friendship group of survivors of the bombings. In 1976, Kaz Sueishi met with Japan's Minister of Health and petitioned for medical relief for all hibakusha in the US. She asked that hibakusha certificates issued by the Japanese government be made available at consulates, and that a team of doctors specializing in radiation-related ailments visit to examine hibakusha and their children on an ongoing basis. Since 1977, a medical team has visited Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle, and Honolulu every other year. The RAFU would run the announcements when the medical team from Hiroshima would visit the area, so hibakusha would know that it was time for their checkups. Decades later, the survivors face heightened risk of cancer and other illnesses. During these important medical examinations, the Hiroshima doctors and the hibakusha would share one message: that the world must have peace. In March, after Russia invaded Ukraine and suggested the possible use of atomic weapons, these doctors from the Hiroshima International Council for Healthcare of the Radiation Exposed, HICARE, were among those to condemn Russia's actions. When the doctors came from Hiroshima in 2013, Kaz Sueishi said, "The most important thing is that people love each other." Even out of all that pain, the message was one of love. The Japanese and Japanese American community is one that has experienced pain. The pain of forced removal and incarceration during World War II, the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the rise in anti-Asian violence and hatred that is happening today. This pain is recorded in the pages of the Rafu Shimpo. But within that pain, there is hope and inspiration in the remarkable courage and selflessness of those like the hibakusha, who serve as examples for all of us to live by. At a small community newspaper, the people you cover become a part of you, their stories a part of you. And so one of the most difficult and necessary jobs at the RAFU is to report on the passings, the obituaries of those who have contributed so much throughout their lives. When Katsui Ishii died in 2017 at age 90, once again her words resonated. No more Hiroshima, no more Nagasaki, no more hibakusha, no more any war. I think back and recall how often this message was directed at the young people who were listening, how there was a sense of urgency that the youth hear of the experiences of the survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Our job as journalists is to make sure their voices continue to be heard, that these stories continue to be told, that their message of peace and hope is not lost and will continue to resonate for generations to come. Thank you.
The last time ASA board member gathered in person was in March 2020. Since then, we have conducted board meetings and commemorations event on Zoom. In other words, like everybody else in the world, we managed to master the art of remote work. This past January, longtime board member and secretary, Mrs. Seino Midori, stepped down as secretary. Her position has been taken up by new board member, Mrs. Takako Augustin. Before letting Mrs. Augustin introduce herself, we, as board members of ASA, would like to acknowledge and thank Mrs. Midori Seino for her work throughout the years. For over a decade, she has handled the biannual medical examination, and she's been on top of the administrative work related to the biannual medical examinations. Her work for the atomic bomb survivors of Southern California has been enormous. Her support during the medical examination has also been priceless. We would like to acknowledge her work, her empathy, and her patience for staying on top of all the bureaucratic demands that this biannual medical examinations require. And now, here are board members, Mrs. Takako Augustin, followed by Mrs. Hiroko Nakano, Mrs. Taiko Okabe, and Mr. Aur Kakita.
はじめまして、私の名前は高子オーガストソンと申します。今年の4月に朝の理事に任命されました。私の仕事は長年生のミロさんがやってこられている今も膨大な仕事をされてますが、そのみどりさんのお手伝いをするということなのです。精一杯私させていただきますから、皆様どうぞよろしくお願いいたします。体験談をちょっと私の被爆体験談をお話ししたいと思います。私は広島で生まれ、1964年まで広島に住んでおりました。8月6日、原爆が落とされたその当日、私は母と2ヶ月半の妹と3人で朝ごはんを食べておりました。2階建てだったので、爆風でぺっちゃんこになってしまって、気がついた時は私は真っ暗闇の中にうつ伏せになっていました。2歳半でした。その時のことを覚えております。手探りで手を前の方にやると小石が当たり口にガリッと入れた。美味しくないと吐き出した。これが本当に覚えているっていうことが驚きですね。それから私たちは住んでる場所は 1.7 キロの西観音町でしたが、それから私たち母と恋まで歩き、母は背中に刺さっていた無数のガラスを取っていただき、そこの 医療テントで、そして私たちは父と母が原爆や戦争が起き前に何か惨事があったらここに集まろう、この宮内村の宮島沿線なんですけれども集まろうということになっていたので、そこまで私たちは歩きました。どのぐらい歩いたでしょうか。おそらく12マイルとか13マイル、15マイルぐらいなのかと思います。その時の記憶が私は一コマ一コマの漫画のように覚えているだけで、母はその当時のことを話してくれたことは一度もありません。しかし3つだけ話をしてくれました。一つは私たちが歩いている途中に裸足で歩いていた私に草履を投げてくださった方、またスルメの足をくださった方、そして最後にその当日私を瓦礫の中から大黒柱に挟まれて裏庭の火が飛びかかっているところを母が大声で助けを求めたら、若い男性が来て大きな床柱を持ち上げてくれ、私はそこから引き出され焼け死ぬことを免れ、その方に命を助けられたのです。こうして私たちは宮内からほぼ大怪我もなく、妹だけは即死でしたが、広島の宇品にある県病院の中に住み、そこから住宅に県病院が官舎ができたので、そこにしばらく過ごしてまいりました。本当に私はそこで命を救われたわけです。原爆の時にあの方たちに、そしてその惨事の中にもたくさんの皆さんの行為によって私はこうして生きながらえて健康で病気もせず生きてまいりました。来年80歳になります。何か今まで何もしてこなかったので、何かできることは私にないのだろうか、被爆者としてと考えている時に、ちょうど清野みどりさんから朝のお手伝いをしていただけませんかというお声がかかりました。そのお声に対してイエス、やりましょうとお答えすることを後押ししてくれたのは、広島から送ってくる新聞記事を読んでいたからです。8月6日にはそれぞれの場所で家族と共に私の命、母の命、父の命を助けてくれた人々のために祈り、感謝し、そして一緒に気持ちを一つにして、やはり核兵器のない平和な世界になるよう祈っていきたいと思っております。何卒よろしくお願いいたします。ありがとうございました。
私は4歳で爆心地から1マイルの広島市南区で母と2歳の弟と自宅で被爆し、全壊した家の下敷きになりました。父、長男、次男はそれぞれの動員先から2、3日後にやっと帰宅しました。小学生だった5年生の三男と1年生の四男は登校していた小学校で被爆しました。全壊した校舎から自力で出て校庭をふらふらと歩いていた1年生の四男と、自宅からやっと脱出した私と弟を連れた母が奇跡的に合流できました。しかし5年生のよしおは見つかりません。しっかりした子だから自力で家族で決めている避難先に行けると信じた母は、 まず手元の3人の子を守るため、倒れた校舎を後にしました。しかし、その後に火災が発生し、校舎とともに吉尾は焼死しました。家族の一員を亡くした我が家では、原爆の話は一切ありませんでした。母は元気で6人の子育ての上、家業の写真館の仕事もしていましたが、被爆後の15年間は病弱で入退院を繰り返す身となり、52歳で亡くなりました。母に連れられた私たちは途中、救護所で傷の手当てを受けたことをうっすらと覚えています。4歳の私はもっと悲惨な情景を見ているはずですが、ほとんど覚えていません。ところが2月24日のロシアのウクライナへの侵攻を知って以来、ニュースを見るたびに急に気分が悪くなり、核使用を示唆する発言があってからは、嘔吐したり、下痢をしたり、急に片頭痛を起こすようになっています。4歳で体験した被爆の情景を覚えていなくても、私の脳の奥底ではがっちりとそれを捉えていて、それが現実に起きている戦争によってふつふつと湧き出てくるのでしょうか。言葉では言いようのない恐怖を感じています。今日は77周年の原爆期です。原爆は過去のことではなく、現在の問題です。二度と繰り返してはいけないのです。今、世界は危機に直面しています。人間同士の戦争どころか、人間と次々と発生する新型ウイルスとの戦いです。心身ともに穏やかな夜になることを念じ祈っています。
2020年のコロナ禍から今年で3年になりました。毎年8月6日が近づくにつれ、今年こそは皆様と一緒に高野山での法要ができるのではと思いつつも、残念ながら今年もズームでの法要になりました。今現在はコロナ禍に加え、ロシアとウクライナの戦争、アメリカ国内ではあちらこちらで銃による事件、さまざまな凶悪犯罪などで穏やかにいられないですね。その上にロシアが原子爆弾を使うのではと一時ニュースにもなりました。私は父の顔を知らずに育ちました。両親は父の仕事の関係で大阪に住み、焼夷弾から逃げ惑う毎日でしたそうです。お腹に私を抱えて危険と思い広島に帰ったそうですが、疎開をした広島の故郷で被爆して、私はその年の10月に生まれましたが、父は私が8ヶ月の時に原爆症で亡くなりました。被爆後77年経っても後遺症に苦しんでいる方がたくさんいらっしゃる世の中、どのようなことがあろうとも原子爆弾を使うことは私は反対したいです。ノーモー被爆者ですね。いろいろなことを抱えながら心の晴れない不自由な毎日の世の中での毎日でしょうが、お体を大切になさって、いつかまたみんなで笑ってお会いできるのを楽しみに、お元気でお過ごしくださいますよう心より願っております。ASA 理事岡部妙子。
Hi, my name is Haru Kakita, and I would like to break my presentation up into 3 parts. Starting with my story about how a 7.5-year-old boy and his older brother Kenny were in the middle of Hiroshima when the first A-bomb was dropped, at the same time being separated from our parents who were incarcerated in the Poston, Arizona concentration camp in the United States. Then I would like to press on and address some of the global issues that are facing us today, and then conclude with some key messages. I'm a Sansei, and I'm also a Hibasha, born in East Los Angeles in 1938. In 1940, we had heard that our grandfather, who lives in Hiroshima, was deathly ill. So we got on the boat from San Pedro, bound for Yokohama, and ended up in Hiroshima. And we had a wonderful stay. And during that stay, my grandfather, his health had improved. And by June of 1940, my parents had to go back to the United States to resolve some business issues. However, the intent was for them to return to Japan shortly after resolution. But before they could come back, the war had started, and we were stuck for the duration. Although my memories of my early childhood is kind of sketchy, I do remember vividly. It was exactly 77 years ago. It was a beautiful Monday morning. Around 8 o'clock, we had heard that there was a B-29 approaching Hiroshima. So my older brother and I, we climbed on top of the roof of a bathhouse, which is built adjacent to the main house. It had a flat roof from which we could see the distant vapor trail of the B-29 approaching us. When our grandmother discovered that we were still on top of the roof, she told us to get off the roof in no uncertain terms. So we grudgingly came down. I went back into the bathhouse, and then the bomb went off. When the bomb exploded, we were exactly 1.3 kilometers from the hypocenter. I didn't see the flash, nor did I hear the boom. I was knocked unconscious. But when I came to, the structure was on top of me, and I could see fire and smoke around me. However, I wasn't badly injured, so I was able to dig myself out and escape to the courtyard of our home. My brother Kenny was standing there with only a slight burn on top of his forehead. My grandmother, on the other hand, she was in the kitchen washing dishes as the bomb exploded. And evidently she was standing facing the window. So the shards of glass upon explosion had embedded into her body, and she was bleeding quite a bit, although not fatally. And luckily, all four of us had survived. By that time, all the structure around us were in a heap of rubble and beginning to burn. My grandfather formed a fire brigade with some of the men in the area, and with buckets of water, they were trying to put up the flame, not knowing the extent of damage around our neighborhood. However, he told grandmother to take the boys, that would be my older brother and me, towards the mountain to escape from the burning city. There was a sea of carnage that we had witnessed. There were a number of people walking like a parade of zombies coming out of the inner city and trying to escape with tremendous injuries. Anyway, as we started to walk, we could see people already dead on the road or dying, begging for a glass of water. Almost as devastating as the bombing itself was when we returned to our home. Our home was completely gone, had totally disappeared. Our town had disappeared. Not only that, the city was no longer standing. Only things standing were non-combustible items. The rivers are still full of people who had died. And there were some concerted effort to gather the bodies and start the cremation process. So the stench of the decaying body as well as the cremation itself was really something that I remember vividly. Initially, we lived in the bomb shelter that had survived the bombing. It was just basically a small hole in the ground, 10 by 10 or so. And we lived there until we were able to build a small shack of whatever non-combustible item that was available in that area. and we had dysentery, we had hair loss. Today, I watched the evening news of the brutal invasion of the Russian against the Ukrainian people with complete disregard for civilians, as well as the city infrastructure and the historical artifacts of the city. At the same time, I admire the courage, the resilience, and the fortitude of the Ukrainians to fight against tremendous odds the Russian invasion. I became even more concerned when Russia attacked in the city of Zaporizhia 6 nuclear power plants. Within the power plant, there was 2,000 skilled workers who are now captured and enslaved and not confined. Not only that, the Russians have fortified this area. They have placed mines within the river that provides cooling water for the nuclear power plants. This could be a recipe for a disaster which took place in Chernobyl some 36 years ago, only 300 miles away from Zaporizhia. Not only that, the Russia was already warned or threatened that they might use a nuclear weapon if there were further interference from the NATO countries. Despite all of the efforts of previous hibakshas and many non-nuclear proliferation advocates, the stockpile of nuclear warhead have increased from 2 77 years ago to now well over 13,000 worldwide. Not only that, China has already stated that they're going to increase their stockpile from somewhere in the neighborhood of 300 now to over 1,000 by the end of this decade. Iran is on the verge of having a nuclear weapon. North Korea continue their testing. There are enough nuclear weapons in the world right now to destroy the world several times over. And all of these weapons were developed on a pretext to be used as a deterrent weapon. However, there is absolutely no difference between the deterrent and the offensive nuclear bomb. We have already heard that the Russian leaders are threatening the world to convert the deterrent weapon into an offensive weapon. There is a famous quote by Sir Winston Churchill many, many years ago who said that those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Let's hope that our world leaders study the history and understand the implications of a nuclear weapon, and that they could come up with a peaceful solution to the turmoil that's taking place around the world today. Many current and past hibakshas have shared their stories. Let's hope that we could send a powerful message to the world leaders to stop the proliferation of nuclear weapons and ban the use of nuclear weapons altogether. As the number of the hibaksha are getting smaller and smaller, it is the hope of every hibaksha that no one else in the future generation will be designated as hibaksha again. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Howard, for sharing your experience in Hiroshima and your insight into the current situation in Ukraine. Despite the pandemic, Howard has been busy sharing his testimony and the ramifications of the war in Ukraine with NHK Hiroshima, Indie newspaper, Kyoto News, and the Italian newspaper La Stampa. His testimony was also recorded by Shinpei Takeda for the Nagasaki Peace Museum, and he has also participated in the filming of the Cold War documentary by Mr. Brian Knappenberger, an award-winning documentarian. Dr. Stoller has also been busy working on not just one, but 2 books. Chronology of Atomic Bomb Survivors in the U.S. will be available at the end of this year, and Japanese American citizens as survivors of the Hiroshima atomic bomb will be available by the end of 2023. While the pandemic doesn't seem to want to go away, we will continue to push for peace on Earth and a world free of nuclear weapons. Now back to Gloria for our closing message.
Thank you, everyone. We really appreciate you spending this past hour with us. We would like to thank in particular Bishop Matsumoto and Ms. Regina Sakurai, Mrs. Gwen Muranaka, Hiroshima Mayor Matsui Kazumi, and Nagasaki Mayor Taue Tomihisa. A special thank you to board member Howard Kakita as we faced some technical difficulties over this past couple of days. And thank you to Daryl as well for being available this afternoon. The recording of this event will be available on our website, nomorehibakusha.org. And as we said at the beginning, we hope to be able to hold the 2023 commemoration event in person at Koyasan next August. Once again, thank you everyone for joining us, and you have a great rest of the day. Goodbye now.